Everyone saw William Powell as Hollywood's perfect gentleman, sophisticated, charming, the kind of guy who made martinis look like an art form. But what they didn't see was the darkness lurking behind that polished smile. The woman he loved dying in his arms from something completely preventable, the experimental treatment that could have killed him, the friend who crashed into a mountain, and the son who left him one final devastating letter. Powell wasn't just playing a detective in The Thin Man, he was hiding the most tragic story in old Hollywood. In 1937, William Powell was on top of the world. He'd just finished filming with the woman he planned to spend his life with, Jean Harlow, the original blonde bombshell. They'd met through Clark Gable, and the connection was instant. Powell was 42, divorced twice, and exhausted from failed relationships. Harlow was 25, tired of her mother controlling every aspect of her life, desperate to start a family. They were complete opposites, who somehow fit perfectly. But Harlow had a secret Powell didn't know about. The year before, she'd gotten pregnant with his child. She wanted to keep it. Powell didn't want to be a father again. He already had a son from his first marriage, and that relationship was strained. So, under her mother's pressure, Harlow made a choice that would haunt her. She terminated the pregnancy without telling Powell. The procedure weakened her body in ways no one understood at the time. Then came the wisdom teeth. Seems harmless, right? Harlow got them removed and developed sepsis. She recovered, but her body never fully bounced back. By May 1937, while filming Saratoga with Gable, something was clearly wrong. Her face swelled, she couldn't breathe properly. Gable lifted her for a scene and immediately knew this wasn't just exhaustion. He gently put her down and called for help. The studio doctor thought it was just cystitis and the flu. Nobody knew she'd been battling severe health issues all year. On May 29th, Harlow leaned against Gable during a scene and whispered, "I feel terrible. Get me back to my dressing room." Powell rushed from his own set to take her home. He called her mother, begging her to come back from vacation. That decision would cost Harlow her life. Because Mama Jean was a Christian Scientist. She didn't believe in medical intervention. When doctors diagnosed gallbladder inflammation and recommended hospitalization, Harlow's mother sent them away. For an entire week, Jean Harlow lay in bed, her blonde hair wild across silk pillows, too weak to even turn the pages of Gone with the Wind. Her mother kept insisting she'd be back on set in days. MGM released conflicting statements. She's seriously ill. No, wait, she's recovering. Gable visited and knew immediately what the doctors had missed. When he kissed her cheek, he smelled urine on her breath. Her body was swollen. She was in complete kidney failure. Finally, on the 8th day, after Harlow couldn't even see Powell's face clearly anymore, her mother agreed to hospitalization. Too late, Harlow fell into a coma that night and died the next morning at 11:37 a.m. She was 26 years old. At the funeral, Powell was so broken he couldn't stand without support. His fists clenched in agony, held upright by his mother and a screenwriting friend. He'd placed a single white gardenia in her coffin with a note, "Good night, my dearest darling." Her tombstone read simply, "Our baby." The woman who could have been saved with basic medical treatment was gone because of her mother's beliefs. But the universe wasn't done with William Powell yet. The grief manifested physically. Powell collapsed on set filming Double Wedding. He thought it was just the depression. He'd always struggled with what he called his dark Irish periods. But this was different. The studio initially claimed intestinal troubles, maybe appendicitis. Then the real diagnosis came: rectal cancer. In 1937, that was essentially a death sentence. The standard treatment meant surgery and living with the colostomy bag for the rest of your life. Powell looked at his options and said something that revealed his character completely. The worst thing about the situation was the aesthetics of it. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of losing his dignity. So he agreed to something that sounds like medieval torture. Doctors would implant platinum needles filled with radioactive radium pellets directly into the tumor. It was experimental. Dangerous. Most patients didn't survive, but Powell preferred gambling on death over living diminished. He disappeared from Hollywood for 2 years. The public didn't know if he'd ever return. During his recovery in Italy, a young boy in rags ran past him shouting excitedly to his friends in Italian. A bystander translated, the boy was thrilled because William Powell's movies always made him laugh. That moment reminded Powell why his life mattered. Against all odds, the treatment worked. Within 2 years, he was in complete remission, one of the very few lucky ones to survive that brutal procedure. Through everything, Gene's death, the cancer, the isolation, one person never left his side: his ex-wife, Carla Lombard, the woman he had divorced after 2 years of marriage because they were too different. She was wild, loved parties, cursed like a sailor. He needed order, quiet, routine. Their marriage couldn't survive, but their friendship was unbreakable. Lombard showed up at Gene's funeral to support him. She called constantly during his cancer treatment, offering blunt advice mixed with creative profanity. She made him laugh when he thought he'd never smile again. And just when Powell was finally recovering, putting his life back together, Lombard gave him devastating news. She had married Clark Gable. Powell was happy for her, genuinely. Gable was his friend, Carla was his friend, and they deserved each other. The fate had other plans.
January 1942, Lombard traveled to her home state of Indiana for a war bond rally. In one night, she raised over $2 million for the war effort. The plan was to take a train back to Los Angeles, but Lombard wanted to get home to Gable faster. She pushed for a flight instead. Her mother and Gable's publicist, Otto Winkler, were both terrified of flying. They wanted the train. Lombard insisted. TWA Flight 3 stopped in Las Vegas to refuel. At 7:07 p.m., it took off into the night. 32 miles southwest of Las Vegas, the plane slammed into Double Up Peak near Potosi Mountain. All 22 passengers died instantly, including Lombard, her mother, Winkler, and 15 U.S. Army soldiers. The safety beacons that should have guided the pilot had been turned off to prevent Japanese bombers from using them as navigation. The crew flew blind into the mountain. Lombard was 33 years old. William Powell and his new girlfriend, Diana Lewis, called Mousy, spent the entire night on the phone waiting for news, praying for a miracle. When confirmation came that Carol was gone, Powell mourned once again. The woman who saved him from his darkest moments, who divorced him but never stopped loving him, was dead because she wanted to get home a few hours earlier. Most people would have shattered completely. Powell almost did, but he had Mousy now. He'd met Diana Lewis in 1939 at a poolside photo shoot organized by MGM. She was 21, a contract player, who viewed acting as just a job, not a calling. Powell was 47, twice divorced, cancer survivor, still grieving Gene. Everyone said the age gap was too much. Everyone was wrong. Lewis was different from the ambitious Hollywood stars Powell had loved before. She didn't want fame, she wanted a partner. Powell called her Mousy, and she stuck by him through everything that followed. They never married for years. Powell was done with weddings, but she was more devoted than any wife. In 1948, Powell earned an Oscar nomination for Life with Father. In 1955, he took his final role in Mr. Roberts alongside Henry Fonda and Jack Lemmon. Lemmon remembered him as the cast's nurturing father figure, always prepared with snacks, impeccably organized. James Cagney marveled at Powell's theatrical stories and noted that his sophistication wasn't an act, it was genuinely who he was. When Myrna Loy asked if he was sure about retiring, Powell replied, "Minnie, I wouldn't even groom my mustache again, much less learn a movie role." He'd had enough. He and Mousy moved to Palm Springs for a quiet life. Nearly 3 decades of peace stretched ahead. Then 1968 brought one final, crushing blow. Powell's only son, William David Powell, had become a talented screenwriter and assistant producer, but he'd been diagnosed with hepatitis and kidney problems, cruelly the same issues that had killed Jean Harlow. His health declined rapidly. On an ordinary day, William Jr. made a decision. He left his father a 4-page letter. The contents remained private, except for the final devastating words. "Things aren't too good down here. I'm going where it's better." Powell was 76 years old, burying his only child. The son from his first marriage, the relationship that had always been strained, was gone. Most men that age wouldn't recover. But Powell had Mousy. In nearly every photograph of her, she's laughing or smiling wholeheartedly. Powell is usually caught in the same candid joy. She was the secret to his survival. When Myrna Loy visited Powell in Palm Springs later, she asked how he spent his days. "I do my weeds," he joked. Loy shot back, "For God's sake, Bill, you don't know one weed from another." Powell's response revealed his class remained intact. Well, it beats playing Elvis Presley's grandfather. He knew when to exit gracefully. Powell developed diabetes as he approached 90. His health gradually declined. On March 5, 1984, pneumonia finally took him. He was buried next to his son in Desert Memorial Park. In 1997, Mousy joined them. The woman who'd spent over 42 decades bringing light to a man who'd survived unimaginable darkness. Here's what most people never understood about William Powell. He lost the love of his life to preventable medical negligence. He gambled with the radioactive needles to avoid losing his dignity. He buried his ex-wife after a plane crash. He read a final letter from his son explaining why life wasn't worth living anymore. Any one of those events would destroy most people. But Powell did something remarkable. He didn't just survive. He found joy, not by forgetting the tragedies, but by choosing to keep living anyway. By letting Mousy make him laugh. By doing his weeds, even if he couldn't tell them apart from the flowers. Myrna Loy said it perfectly after his death. "I never enjoyed my work more than when I worked with William Powell. He was a brilliant actor, a delightful companion, a great friend, and above all, a true gentleman." The gentleman image wasn't fake. It was just incomplete. Behind the sophisticated smile was a man who'd been through hell and decided that grace, humor, and love were worth fighting for. That's not just Hollywood mythology. That's the kind of strength most of us will never need to find.